If we don't apply AI and experiment quickly and understand how to harness it, we're not going to get the benefits for healthcare.
How should the communication be? I mean, transparency, as you've talked about, is very, very critical. Welcome back to the CIO podcast, where AI meets leadership. I'm your host, Sanjay Puri, and today we are in for a truly special conversation. Our guest has one of the most unconventional origin stories in enterprise AI. She began her career not in Silicon Valley, but in Southeast Asia, reporting for Reuters in Cambodia during the decline of the Khmer Rouge, during covering Pol Pot's last days. She then reported for Associated Press in Madagascar, where she once noted the local tradition included dancing with the dead, and that is not a metaphor. From the field, she moved to nonprofit technology, eventually becoming the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer for Network for Good, a payments and SaaS platform. She then became CEO of Cricket Media and EdTech platform before joining Capital One as the SVP of Card Customer Services and Experiences. Today, she is the Chief Digital and Analytics Officer of the Cigna Group, a Fortune 16 $247 billion global health services company, where she created the company's first ever enterprise-wide AI strategy and is leading a transformation that aims to make healthcare simpler, smarter, and more human. Please welcome to the CIO podcast, Katya Andresen. Katya, it's a pleasure to have you with us. We have a global audience. It's an audience that is made up of your peers. It's also made up of folks who are looking to, aspiring to be in this role. So let's just go a little bit, as I mentioned, your background, which is an unusual background. Most AI leaders come through engineering or data science. You come through basically foreign correspondence covering wars and cholera, etc. In your case, for our listeners who are trying to figure out how to get to these places, what has journalism in some of these critical environments taught you about navigating uncertainty and, in some cases, information symmetry or asymmetry that comes with leading AI at enterprise scale?
Well, like I said, I'm so delighted to be here. And thank you for that question. I think it's a head scratcher to some how a journalist ended up where I did. And it may be counterintuitive, but actually, when I think back over the course of my career, the job that best prepared me for this moment for navigating AI in a changing world is journalism. So why? So I worked for wire services. And when you work for a wire service, you're typically stationed in a country or you're brought into a country to cover just about everything under the sun that might be happening. And you are expected to do this in a very accurate way, but also in an incredibly quick way. And when you work for a wire service, if you're covering something like a big event, for example, I covered a very tragic plane crash, you're measured by how quickly you file a story, but you're in trouble if the story is wrong. So I remember getting a call after one of these events and, saying, congratulations, you were 15 seconds ahead of Associated Press. So think about it. These are complex, fast-moving situations. The stakes are high, and you have to quickly separate signal from noise. You have to pressure test information. You have to be accurate and clear, but you need to be very, very nimble, or none of that matters. And so that education in understanding the balance between getting it right and moving quickly and being highly flexible were incredible skills. And I use them every day to this day. It also gave me a love of being in disruptive, constantly changing environments. So I have a particular affection for this moment that we're in because it's never dull and there's always something to learn and navigate. So I would just say the best journalists and the best AI leaders share the same core skill. So it's knowing which questions to ask before you publish the story. And that's something I did then, and I find myself doing now every time I consider how to use this technology.
Just one quick thing for our listeners, some young people who are trying to figure out in their career. We are in a very, I would call it a transformative, sometimes critical moment for young people trying to figure out with what AI is doing. A traditional path is not always critical to get to where you are, Katya. Is I think that is one of the key messages that you are giving to young people. As long as you have some of those critical skills, covering Pol Pot to Cigna, that's an incredible journey. But just do you have any just quick bite for some of our young people?
I have two daughters. One just graduated last week. And I'll tell you what I tell them. They both chose to get a liberal arts education. And I was a history major. So another odd fact about where I landed. However, I really think that what that teaches you is a combination of insatiable curiosity, constant learning, and critical thinking. And so what I would say to today's graduates are, don't be too worried about the sound bites, right? The layoffs at Meta, or this idea that your entry level jobs don't exist anymore, and really focus on what, as a unique human, you have to bring in terms of your curiosity, perspective, and desire to use critical thinking to solve problems. Because none of this technology matters if it's not pointed at the right problems, and none of it will succeed if it's not put into a powerful context about what we're really trying to achieve together. And I don't think that's a skill the technology is going to master anytime soon. But if you've gone through your education and you're feeling nervous about what's next, trust your mind, trust the questions you ask and your openness to where those lead, and you'll be in a good spot. My entire career has been governed by following the next breadcrumb of what makes me curious. And I think that if you are genuinely wanting to know more and more about something, that will lead you to be very good at it.
Let's talk a little bit about where you are at today at Cigna. You joined in 2021. There are so many different titles today, Chief AI Officer, Chief Digital Officer, Chief Data Officer. You have a very interesting title. What does that, just very briefly, what does that encompass?
So my title is Chief Digital and Analytics Officer. So let me explain what that really means. So my team is tasked with several things. One is unlocking the value of our data. So how are we going to better realize how we harness data in a way that will make healthcare better? I also have the teams that do analytics. So the data science teams, the ones who are taking that data and figuring out how to build models that help us better predict what is next for a patient, for a provider, for our business. I have the digital teams, which build the experiences that harness those insights to try to change the trajectory of someone's risk for the better, right? Which is good business, good human outcomes at the same time. And then I also have the innovation teams that are constantly looking at our AI strategy, our AI projects, and figuring out how to bring more of a R&D startup mindset to some of the things that are least clear, so we can test and learn our way into what's next for healthcare and for our company.
So when you came in 2021, what was the stage of AI maturity at Cigna, and what were some of the early internal decisions that you took to get you to where you are at? Again, this is something that came in from your peers, as some of them are grappling with the same issues right now.
When I came in, I would say we were mature in terms of, at that time, how people thought about AI. So if you think about AI, it's an umbrella term, and it encompasses traditional machine learning. It includes deep learning. It includes, of course, generative AI, agentic AI, et cetera. But we had been at machine learning for quite some time. And it's key to how we work in our business of predicting and managing risk. So that was well in place. And the good thing about that serves our models even to this day is that we had really good governance in place. Because in healthcare, we're heavily regulated, the stakes are high. So it's incredibly important that any model that we build, whether it's a hand-built machine learning model or something more sophisticated, is not going to have bias in it, right? Or it's being leveraged in the right ways. And we understand the model, we see the outputs, and that is a well-governed process. So that's where we were. Then what happened, I think, less than a year in, is generative AI came on the scene. And it became clear also that we could both harness that, but also we could harness some of the deep learning that made generative AI possible to do more sophisticated modeling. And so what we've been progressing along is a journey to build our own deep learning models, so artificial neural networks to help us harness our data and understand risk, as well as generative AI. It's such a boon to healthcare. Healthcare is really hard and complex, and generative AI allows us to simplify the process behind it, but also talk to people in not jargon-free language in a conversational way about navigating their healthcare journeys. And then agentic AI allows us to take a lot of the work off of folks' hands in healthcare that needs to be handled by AI, so people can really focus on where you uniquely need humans in healthcare. So it's been quite a ride in a short amount of time. And I'll just say throughout, we try to think about AI maturity is beyond the notion of how sophisticated your models are. It's more about how deeply they're woven into the decisions that actually matter. And I would also say we try not to set out to keep building an AI strategy as much as to keep building a better healthcare company. And AI might be a way to get there faster. So just add that orientation to how we think about maturity.
So build a better healthcare company rather than build a better AI company, I think, Katya, is what you're saying. Katya, you talked a little bit that when you came in, there was a good governance model. Some of your peers are trying to figure out, because healthcare is a pretty high stakes, uniquely high stakes, where decisions can impact lives, clinical outcomes, coverage determinations. How do you architect an AI governance structure that has the rigor to make sure everything is done, but also it doesn't stop you from pushing out stuff that is going to help the patients? Where is that balance, and how do you do that?
Well, you put your finger on the exact tension that's inherent here, right? If we don't apply AI and experiment quickly and understand how to harness it, we're not going to get the benefits for healthcare. At the same time, if you move too quickly and not a well-governed way, there are all kinds of problems, right? And so we have to always be thinking about that balance between opportunity and risk. The way I think about governance, though, is it isn't the tax you pay to sort of move, it's the foundation you build. So you earn the right to move faster. So we were very happy we had that foundation in place. That's not to say it's not something we're having to constantly build on top of, but at least we had that sense that you have to earn the right to move faster through governance. I'll also say sometimes we think of governance as something you layer on top of what you're doing, sort of guardrails you put around the highway that you're racing down. And I think I prefer to think of it different. I'm mixing metaphors here, but it's not like applying a coat of paint, right? It's something that you really have to bake in to everything you're doing from the start. And so I think that has also changed our operating model, right? We understand that when we're building something, we need to have our cyber team involved. We need to have legal involved. We need to have people who test for model bias involved at the start. And then we need to make sure, particularly with agentic, you can bake in a lot of the accountability and guardrails, et cetera, in a very powerful way. And if you think of it as part of the design, it actually can become a competitive advantage because it allows you to be responsible, but it also allows you to go quickly because you have those systems in place and it's not something that you're putting on top of something as an afterthought.
Katya, you touched on agentic AI, which is right now obviously the topic du jour for almost every chief AI officer or enterprise leader we talk about. But these are agents that can make autonomous decisions. They obviously can plan, iterate across different tasks. And they're absolutely the next inflection point. But in healthcare, where you have regulatory compliance and accountability, are there specific frameworks that are unique to AI agents that you need to put in place rather than just pure LLM things that you're doing?
I think agents can be very powerful, and we are using them. The question is where and how you use them. So this gets back to this tension between harnessing the power of AI, but also being careful about how we use AI. And those have to go hand in hand, right? So for example, we have a simple test, does this application of AI help people get the right care with less friction in a way that we can fully stand behind? And if it doesn't, we have to stop or slow down. So there's certain litmus tests we have in terms of considering the role of AI. But I want to say something that's really important here. In healthcare, the goal is not to remove human judgment from the loop. It's to make human judgment better. And so when it comes to things like making a decision about someone's coverage or understanding the next thing that needs to happen clinically, this is where we are augmenting human judgment, not replacing it, right? There are other places where you can use agentic AI to augment in terms of operations. So let me give you an example. We have a voice AI agent we're using in our call centers, for example. And what that does is instead of someone calling and entering one of those dreaded phone trees, right? Press 1 for this, press 2 for that, then you go for the next step. Yeah. And then in healthcare, you rarely fit into one of those neat little categories. You may have a question that spans them or one that's not covered by that, and it can be quite annoying. So what we can do now, though, is use voice agents to let someone describe their problem in plain English, right? If it's something easy, like, have I met my deductible yet? Right? Mm-hmm. That's a great place to have an agent because there's it's a fact. It's not a matter of judgment, etc. But if someone is confused or then wants to talk to a human, we can route them to the person best equipped to answer the question. So that's an example in operations of what it looks like. I'll give you an example with some of our care and case managers. So say we have a nurse, right, who is supporting someone who has cancer. So suppose he is looking at the patient's history and is calling to see how we can help or what care we can provide and answer questions about coverage. Agents can create a very cogent summary rather than having someone read through all kinds of different aspects of the history of that patient, which can take a long time, right? Also, agents could follow up on the call, right? With an automated call to say, remember, this is your dose of medicine. Let us know if we can help. So I just use those tangible examples because there are places in healthcare where we need humans, but even humans can be really benefit and supported with agents. And if you just look at what can an agent do, what can a human do, I think that's not sufficiently nuanced. It's where can humans be helped and serve people better with agents? What's that human agent combination? And then where are things that are just attacks on the system in terms of manual work, et cetera, where we can put in controls that are more automated and turn things over to the technology with no risk.
Katya, I've always wondered, and this is maybe just my personal gripe, that can't we have a dedicated AI agent for let's say you have a subscriber for Cigna that kind of sticks with me, my AI concierge, so that I don't have to begin my journey every time with you, because these are simple things to do. Obviously, I understand their privacy and other things, etc. Because this is being done in other industries now.
So when you think about why is healthcare so annoying and frustrating, a lot of the reasons are it's terribly fragmented and it's not personalized. And yes, this is a great use of AI, is to figure out how do you take all of those experiences and assign an agent who can support you, or a network of agents, probably more likely is what we're thinking about, because you might have a clinical agent, you might have a agent that's handling questions about your coverage, et cetera. But absolutely, that is, a goal that we have. And it's really exciting to think about that. When I first came into healthcare, it was fascinating to me how many people talked about applying technology to help people navigate the healthcare system? And I thought, no one wakes up in the morning wanting to navigate the healthcare system. Like, if we think our job is providing a map or a GPS, that is not a good product design, right? No one wants to navigate healthcare. They want personalized support for their own journeys. And so you very eloquently laid out one of the solutions that we're working on to this problem that has really been so intractable up till now. What's so exciting about this moment is like you said, we have some of the solutions that can finally make this more accessible, more comprehensible, more personalized, and ultimately provide more value.
You also have written about that reliable data, smart integration, and change management. They bring both the clinical and administrative teams together as the keys to AI success in healthcare. Talk to your peers about change management, because that's what kind of sometimes is probably the biggest challenge. Organizations fail to bring in both the clinical teams with the admin teams, and how do you make that successful?
So that is the question. And back to saying encouraging words to people early in their career, at the end of the day, the challenge is the people side of it more than the technology side of it. And so, understanding how you bring people along, how you build toward change is an incredibly important skill. And it's the hardest part of my job. And I bet I'm not the first guest to say, it's the people, not the technology. That's the big challenge, right? So what do we do about it? And what does it look like? I think I'm going to pull out a few things. So one is things break when AI is introduced as a technological change instead of a human way of working differently. So I often say at our organization, the question isn't, what do I do with AI? It's how do I lead in an age of AI? And the question isn't, how do I go apply this tool? It's how do I lead a business strategy with this context that I now can solve problems, or their possibilities exist that didn't before. And so you really have to take it back to the why to even begin to take good change management, but even more importantly, to apply AI in the right ways, right? Because everyone can get tool crazy. You can have death by 1,000 pilots. You can have tremendous opportunity costs with a lot of noise in the system if you don't start with the right problem statement. But that problem statement has a nice side effect, which is if you are thinking about it the right way, you're also thinking about it in a human way. And you're getting past this idea that, oh, I'm learning AI, but AI is going to take my job. And there are good reasons for people to think that. I'm thinking of the news today about Meta, for example, right? And some of the framing around that is very disturbing, right? But I think people need to know and change sticks when people have AI is going to be a way to augment the most important things they do. It's AI can have their back, not just the company's bottom line. Now, that's not true of everything. I don't want to sugarcoat it. There are things that a job that's completely reliant on manual process and that's easily automated, that is something that, AI can replace. But then the question becomes, what do you do with the human capital then? And what are the uniquely human things that you need to prepare your teams for, right? So I think it's back to what problems are we solving with this? And how are we able to do new things or innovate in ways that are going to change the course of our company or our organization for the better? So that's the orientation that I think is really important. I'll also say that, change management is one of those words I get a little nervous about because it does feel like that coat of paint we were talking about before. You can't just stick a change management team on top of everything you're doing with AI. I find that you can't convince your way into adoption. You have to demonstrate your way there and people have to experience it. So what does that look like? I think when people can clearly see how it helps them, how it reduces friction, it gives them better information, advances our mission, it allows them to focus on what only they can do. Clinicians, frontline teams, they begin to feel differently. The other thing is, though, you have to get people working together differently to have success. And that's the trickiest part of change management is your operating model. What we do there is we work on creating really small teams that are very, very cross-disciplinary. So you put an operations person together with an AI engineer, with a product builder, a very small team, but you put them together to work together to begin to understand and harness what this technology can do. But at the same time, you're changing how the humans interact. And if you can get most people through that experience a few times, they begin to think about this very differently. So it's a combination of orientation out of the gate, like, why are we doing this? What is this for? It's this idea that this can solve problems we couldn't solve before. How is it augmenting me? And then it's walking through several revs of working differently. And I think without experiencing it, it's easy to remain a cynic or a critic. And so people have to be really thoughtful. This isn't a thing of words. Words and messaging is not going to bring about change management. It's people really feeling and experiencing how this is helpful to them and what they're trying to accomplish.
How important is the top leadership's role in this change management? That's one question. And then you said it's not just communication, it's actually doing it. There is obviously a fear within employees right now as to what it is going to be. You just talked about Meta, and obviously there's a litany of companies out there. How should the communication be? I mean, is transparency, as you've talked about, is very, very critical. How should your peers who are kind of dealing with the same situation kind of go about this? One is the top-down support, and then there's interdepartmental issues also here. So just briefly, if you can just address that for your peers.
I think that your point around top-down support is critical. I would say it's not just for AI. For any important transformation at a company, there has to be a belief that the top of the house, that the board are behind the change and that they are part of the narrative of why the change matters. And I have a bias toward purpose and mission. I think at a time like this, when things are uncertain and rapidly changing, to have resilience and determination and to be able to succeed at a time like this, you really have to know what's the point of it all, right? What's our why? And so I think leadership talking about why this is important in the context of the whole purpose of the company. And, on my bad days, I ask in my conversations, tell me about why you came here, or what is meaningful to you. And it's there, right? People are at my company at Cigna because they didn't come to Cigna because they thought healthcare worked really brilliantly. They came because they want to change it for the better. And so talking about AI in that context, top down by leaders, is really important. I also think being transparent about it. This is going to lead to change. This is going to lead to a lot of jobs, changing, how we work together changing. And that's not easy. Yet, if we don't change, we're losing the opportunity to really do what we all came here to accomplish in the first place. So I think that is really important from the top down. To the second part of your question around, okay, then you get into sort of teams and how teams are working together and all the tensions between teams, et cetera. I think I always think of the principle of how do you begin to create experiences where people are working across teams to accomplish something. And what I've seen at most companies where I've been is true transformation happens when you can pull together a multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary team of people, and their identity as a group is the problem they're setting out to solve together, not the department they come from. And it sounds simple, but I tell you, I can tell when something's going really well, when there's an update meeting, and I can't tell who's on which team when they're providing the update. And I say, okay, we're in business. This is working really, really well. Because actually to apply these things, you need that representation, right? You need someone from the frontline ops there with the person who has, say, the clinical expertise, with the person who knows how to engineer it effectively, right? So with the person who knows how to design a beautiful experience. Those people need to have their sense of collective purpose aligned around the problem they're solving. And so that's why I am such a broken record on You got to keep going back to what you're trying to accomplish, the problem you're trying to solve. It sounds so simple, but I would say 9 times out of 10, things drift away from that. And so, as leaders, we have to keep coming in and providing that perspective. I find that then the third thing I'll say is if you can just get a few examples of that working well with something happening that is significant, even if it's small, very quickly, suddenly attitudes begin to change. So, if we had a great team of, cross-disciplinary people come together and build a really powerful agent in 2 weeks that, saved incredible amounts of manual work, for example, and suddenly everyone understood in a different way and the enthusiasm level went way up. So sometimes seeing is believing, right? I'm one of those people who will see it, even if it's not there yet. But I think some need to see to believe. And so having some very visible wins helps create that sense of belief.
So, three very important points that you made, Katya, for our listeners. One is the why. Make sure that you're clear about the why. And then second was the identity. If it's the mission, not the different groups, and if you can't tell who is from where, then it's succeeding. And then third was celebrate the wins that you have. I think those are excellent points. Katya, another question that came in from a healthcare peer of yours is, there's so many use cases that clinicians bring to you for AI. Especially, there are some powerful clinicians. How do you pick some, and how do you gently say no to some?
A really tricky one, right? You want to encourage bottom-up ideas and innovation, but you also have to apply some top-down orientation around the biggest problems to solve, right? And so we try to have a mechanism for both. So we have leaders of each line of business really aligning around, these are the biggest problems to solve. And if we can solve them with AI, we believe there's the greatest value. Then we have a mechanism for people with ideas to go in and with an AI agent, put in their idea, get some help and understand, is this something they can do independently? Like, could they build this agent to read their email, right? Or do they really need a big initiative for this? Because a lot of people newer to AI are just getting their head around it, right? They don't quite understand, like, what do I need a development team to do versus what could I actually do within my team? And that is changing all the time, right? We can do more and more things in terms of individual productivity or with less coding experience, right? So we have an intake sort of so that every idea can, people can have a chance to explore whether that's something that has ROI. But the most important thing is that you have a prioritized list at the top of the company or the top of each line of business saying, these are the problems that we care about solving most. And we're going to put our best tiger teams on those. And then we're going to encourage individual efforts at the same time, but we're not going to let things crowd out the most valuable things. And then a quick word on ROI. So ROI, you can measure in different ways. And we have multiple ways we measure it. So there are things that we're doing that have the aim of making things more efficient, better, faster, cheaper. That's measured by OpEx reduction. That's a valid form of ROI. But it's not the only form of ROI. We also have ROI as measured by margin for the business. Like, maybe this is something that makes the business more profitable. Maybe this is something that makes a key customer experience better. Or maybe it's something that does both, right? And we put that in the category of not just making the business more efficient, but making the business better. So for example, we have one of my favorite things we've done is we have AI that analyzes the millions and millions of phone calls we get. And we were able to understand, what are people's concerns about switching to a biosimilar medication from a brand name medication? And what are the best ways to explain why they should switch? And then we used that to do digital outreach. And we had many, many, many more people on biosimilars. Okay, that's good for margin for a business, but also we saved $200 million for our customers, right? Yeah. They had lower drug costs. So that's an example of a different form of ROI. And then we have more disruptive ROI, strategic value. So for example, my team does things like build advanced models that help us better predict risk in a population or an individual level, that is something that enables all kinds of other things, including perhaps new models for how we take on risk. And so what you want is a portfolio, and what you want is a top-down view on where are we putting our bets? How are we going to run more efficiently, which is really becoming table stakes? How are we going to have a healthier business, both for how we perform and how we create value for our stakeholders? And then last, how are we trying to disrupt ourselves? Because disruption's coming day by day. And how do we then have a very intentional approach to what's most important by those different measures according to those different categories?
Do you think, and is that happening within Cigna, that AI is transformation, but is that also transformation of are you slapping on AI to existing workflows or processes, or is this a moment for maybe re-engineering the organization for a new world?
There are certain aspects of our company in healthcare where if we take a blank sheet of paper and and just start over again and say, what if we were starting a company today? What business process would we design? That is a transformational way to think about it. But there are places also, though, where I wouldn't call it slapping the AI on top of the current business process, but there are some unbelievably efficient chunks of existing business processes that will probably ultimately be entirely replaced by AI, but that still are going to exist for now. And so are there ways to make that more accurate, to lower risk, to make it faster or better? That might be worth it, even if it's like a 2-year thing, or it might ultimately be throwaway work. It might be worth doing. So I'm not dismissive of incremental improvements. I just think if we only do incremental improvements, then we're not really realizing that full value.
So you are looking at a combination of both. Katya, finally, you have an organization which has, a very different kind of employee base. You have obviously, cross-functional organization. You also have clinical professionals. How do you build AI literacy and fluency across such a diverse cross-functional organization? Because that's something a lot of people struggle with.
I think you have to segment your teams, right? So who needs what kind of fluency and literacy, and to what end is the starting question, right? So what does AI fluency mean? At what level of the organization? Who needs to understand enough about AI to reimagine a business versus understand AI in a way to help them code, right? So we start with who needs to understand or know what to what end. And then in partnership with our HR leadership, we have a professional development, training programs, et cetera, that it takes into account like who you are, where you are in your journey, how you may want to need or use this, and how you need to be exposed or learn different operating models to work together to get to that place. In other places, there's a need for training in how to reframe problems or how to do strategy in AI age, which is more almost like business training, right, than technical training. And then if you think about another example, like clinical, our chief medical officer, who's phenomenal, Dr. Amy Flasser, she thinks a lot about the future of healthcare in a clinical context as shaped by AI. And then what does that mean to our overarching strategy, but also for an individual clinical case manager, right? And so there are all kinds of different tracks for supporting people in that. So I guess my answer is you need a lot of nuance here, and you need to keep truing back to for the sake of what. And so if you just throw everyone into co-pilot training and call it a day, you're really missing the point about truly preparing people to lead and work in the age of AI.
Do you encourage shadow AI or you worry about shadow AI?
So I think I'll give the unsatisfying answer. It depends. I use a lot of AI on my personal computer, not related to work, but I build apps or I experiment with every single LLM model and see what it does or doesn't do, et cetera. I want everyone to do that, right? I think experimentation is the way to learn. And so if people are doing this on their own or experimenting with different tools, that's fantastic. Now, if we're talking about using AI for work purposes, then I have a different feeling about it, which is, we are working in a regulated, sensitive environment, and we have to be really careful how we use it. And so what we have done is all AI access is centralized. And so you have to go through our AI gateway. You have to go through our AI center of enablement to get access to the tools. And you can't download some random thing on your laptop and start putting data in it and playing around with it. And so we did that from the start. And I'm really glad we did because it allows us to have those guardrails in the professional environment. But I never want to discourage experimentation and playing around. It's just you don't want people playing around in the work context in ways that create risk. And so we try to balance the two. And then we also have things like sandboxes, et cetera, where people can use synthetic data to try out new tools, et cetera. So there are ways to also support experimentation in a very carefully monitored environment.
So experimentation good, but do it in a careful, monitored environment. I think that's what Katya is saying. Katya, towards the end, we have this stuff that our social media team loves. Those lightning round one-word answers for you.
Okay.
OpenClaw, is it exciting or is it terrifying?
Exciting.
The biggest barrier to AI in healthcare, is it people or is it data?
People.
Do you think AI will replace doctors in your lifetime?
It'll replace parts of their job, but not a fully clinical context.
Synthetic data or human data, which do you trust more for clinical AI models?
Human.
Digital twins in healthcare, is it transformative or still out there?
Becoming transformative.
AI agents, are they overhyped or underhyped, Katya?
Probably overhyped at the moment. But can I just add an old truism? We are overestimating their impact now, and we're underestimating their long-term impact, which is so often the case with technological change.
Katya, this has really been a remarkable conversation, and I really mean that. And what strikes me is about this story is not just your career pivots, which are really extraordinary, from Cambodia to AI neural networks at one of America's largest health companies. But I think it's the constant willingness that you have to hold your assumptions loosely and not write so to speak, the story ahead of time, and do the unglamorous work of getting things right rather than getting things fast. So in an industry, where they reward the hot take and the confident prediction, that is truly countercultural posture. It may be the most important one. And for our listeners who want to follow Katya's work, she writes on Substack at katyaandresen.substack.com and is active on LinkedIn. Katya, thank you so much for your time and also your candor and for sharing what it feels like to work and not just, to do this, not just from the outside. So, and to our listeners, if this is something that has sparked an idea, please subscribe and leave us a review and share it with others. And I'm your host, Sanjay Puri, and this is the CIO podcast. Thank you, Katya. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. What a great conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Chief AI Officer podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. And share it with someone curious about the future of AI. Join us every Friday right here on the CIO podcast as we share more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead.